All right. So, thanks for coming out. As you notice, I am not Dean Bickerton. I think Dean is actually remotely listening to us today, so he'll be correcting us as we go. But my name is Wayne Welk. I work at the Reynolds Company with Bill and Dean as well. And for ISA, if you're not aware of what I do, I'm the web guy and the marketing dude, basically. So I think those are our official titles for those positions. So Dean is, again, he's traveling this week, so kind of asked me to kind of kick it off. We'll go some basic introduction slides, kind of what's coming up, and then we'll kind of introduce the topic today. And then we have two guest speakers from Indegy who sponsored the lunch for us today, so we appreciate Indegy for doing that. And as always, we want to thank MS Benbow for hosting, as always. So this facility is great. We got a great turnout in the room. We got a good web audience, so we'll get going. So first off, we want to welcome aboard a new sponsor. EDG has signed up to be a section sponsor in the last couple weeks. So we want to really a shout out to them and say hello. And just as a refresher, section sponsorship, it's very reasonable, $150 annually. And the benefits are you get the logo. You saw, we had the splash screen going there for a while with all the logos. And you get priority, kind of your priority pick of presenting topics here at section meetings. So we appreciate all of our sponsors. Also, I should say that I don't know if we introduced, I don't see Eric, but Eric Keller, who's with EDG, has taken the role of vice president for the section as well. So we want to welcome him aboard as a board member. And then this is kind of our sponsor title slide for the moment. So filling up the rows. So what's coming up on the agenda? Next month, we'll take a little bit of a diversion, shall we say. We're going to actually host the meeting. Will be at the University of New Orleans in the engineering building, in their auditorium or their lecture hall, as they call it. So this will be a big event. We're going to have the UNO student section involved. Should have a large student audience there as well. And the topic, as you can see, is building the first steamship in history. We'll actually have the author of a book who wrote that book, Steam Coffin, and he will actually be here and he'll present kind of the little bit of an engineering history, what it took to build the first steamship, and a little bit of the story behind that. So that's a unique topic. Should be a great interest. We do have some future dates on the calendar, of course, April through August here identified. And we do have some topics in the works, one including an ethics topic with lapels, somewhere in that April, May timeframe. We've kind of reached out to Nick Sands and Paul Grun to come in and do some presentations. Nick's possibly June. We've also had some of our section sponsors have reached out as well, interested in doing some topics. So we're filling up the calendar. And as always, we want to hear from the members, our membership. If there's topics you want to learn more about, share. I think one of the things that makes the ISA community unique is that we've got a large community to draw from, right? We have a lot of expertise from different companies, from different people. So, we have a lot of resources available we can bring and help and bring technical topics to our community. Also, this might be a little bit off, it's in April, but just to kind of wanted to make mention that the District 7 leadership meeting is on the calendar towards the end of April. It's in Galveston this year. And some of the topics that are on the agenda is how to bring new leadership into local sections, as well as sponsorship best practices, which Dean's actually been asked to present that, kind of how we're doing our sponsorship model this year. And although we're not presenting on this topic, they're also going to talk about using technology such as web-based meetings there as well. So I think we're pushing the envelope a little bit on that one. So enough of the ISA intro. We'll talk about the cybersecurity in ISA. I'll have a few slides here, kind of the warm-up act before we turn it over to Indegy on kind of ISA's perspective on cybersecurity, and then the NIST. We'll talk about that. So ISA is one of the thought leaders in this space. So ISA by far is leading the charge on industrial cybersecurity standards. ISA 99 is is an established standard that industry looks to, and they look at the ISA looks at it as a holistic approach and bridging the gap between operations and information technology, the OT to IT as it's referred to, worlds, and between process safety and cybersecurity. So ISA is all in on cybersecurity. There's a lot of resources out there. This is a screenshot right of ISA's website. So if you go under technical topics, there's a cybersecurity resources section, and there's links to standards, to training. There are certification programs around cybersecurity. There are white papers and some conformity assessment information as well. So again, ISA is a great place to come to get some baseline information on cybersecurity. But today we're going to talk about the framework, the NIST framework, and we'll kind of introduce the NIST framework, and then we're going to turn over to Inji, and they'll talk about more tactical, perhaps how you kind of apply some of that into the NIST framework. So first off, a shout out to President Obama, former president. So this is going back a few years, but there was an executive order, 13636, which President Obama had signed into effect, which basically said that basically brought attention to the fact that our critical infrastructure, in cybersecurity, that it's a responsibility to be, for our critical infrastructure to be aware and to address cybersecurity, right? So and then there's a link to it. So there's an actual, you can go read the executive order. It didn't necessarily tell people you had to do this stuff, but it's basically saying that it was within the best interest of the United States to enhance the security and the resiliency of the critical infrastructure, right? So first off is, what is critical infrastructure? That's actually defined by Department of Homeland Security as there's 16 critical infrastructure sectors, right? So pretty much what you would assume to be critical infrastructure, right? So chemical, communications, right? Defense, energy, water, wastewater, those things that we count on every day for just the way we live. Everything we depend on all that, and any kind of disruption in any one of those critical infrastructure sectors could wreak havoc on the economy or our personal lives. So the executive order was signed. These critical infrastructures are defined. So it kind of fell into the NIST, which is the National Institute of Standards and Technologies, which is a part of the Department of Commerce, to kind of develop these, shall we say, guidelines, or this framework, as it's called, around cybersecurity. So, the NIST has been around since 1901. And it's a non-regulatory agency, right? So they're not necessarily telling you what to do and how to do it, but they've been around with the measurement science and standards and technologies for a long time. And from a cybersecurity mission, they actually their mission is to try to implement practical cybersecurity and privacy through outreach and effective application of the standards and best practices. So again, it's not a it's not a law that says you have to do this, but they're here to kind of help, show you the way, right? Here's kind of the best practices. Here's some of the best standards out there to help guide you to that cybersecurity awareness and risk reduction. So as a result of the executive order, and then the standards and technology getting the kind of it falling into their bucket, shall we say, they came out with the framework. So the framework is it's a pretty simple, easy to follow document. It's nothing. This is actually it. It's about 40 pages. It's not a 600-page. Got to go to college, special classes and learn about it. It's about a 40-page framework document that essentially breaks down the most common things you would expect in a cybersecurity risk reduction strategy, and it's designed here to be. It's kind of it's an Excel spreadsheet, quite honestly. If the book there kind of the little guide, the PDF guide just kind of talks about it in words, but really it's a PDF spreadsheet that you can easily look at. Column 1 is functions, column 2 is categories, where you kind of break it into a little more detail on each of the functions, and then subcategories is going into even more detail on each one of those. And we'll show this in a second. So basically, again, the framework is designed to be a risk management tool, and it helps provide organization and structure and consistency amongst industry. So there are many frameworks out there. NIST is not the only one, but I think what NIST is trying to do is, some other frameworks that are out there are wind up being very industry specific, right? Maybe there's like one specifically to like an IT industry, or one specifically to maybe a banking industry or something. But the idea of the NIST framework was to kind of bring in experts from an entire, from many companies, many industries, those critical infrastructure industries, and kind of put down on paper, okay, what are those best practices that you guys work with? What are these, what is the best way to go? And so you get a larger, you have a larger consensus, you have a larger community of people to draw from, and that's why NIST is probably the one that gets the most recognition out there, because it's very, shall we say, again, it's very generic, shall we say, in how it can be applied. It doesn't matter how large your organization is either, right? Large, medium, small. So the framework, think of it as really, it's just kind of a template, right? So somebody comes to you and says, hey, I want you to help start a cybersecurity program at my company, right? Well, that's pretty daunting approach, maybe a pretty daunting thing that's been asked of you. So the framework is really here to help say, okay, well, these are the steps, right, that are most commonly used to get to that point, right? You need to have, we have these 5 major functions that we think about. And then as we go in these 5 major functions, we break them down into a little more detail at each layer, all right? So it's designed to be a starting point for you and a guide. Of course, a lot of companies out there do kind of have their own cybersecurity policies in place. So your company might have your own policy, and your company might have your own policy. There's nothing wrong with that, but there's really no consistency there, right? So if my company's doing it one way, your company's doing another way, so as you try to look at your cybersecurity risk reduction, right? So maybe you think, you might think to yourself that, hey, I actually know everything and I don't need any help. What? You're kind of that one man on the island thing. That may not be the best case. So the idea of the NIST too is that it once again, it's a larger community of people who have crossed that bridge before, right? You don't have to go reinvent the wheel. Come to this and use these guidelines and this framework to help guide you. And even if you have your own policy in place, it's a good chance that maybe you didn't realize, well, maybe at this level, we didn't think about that before, right? So you should always be open to new ideas, especially in cybersecurity risk reduction. So the framework's broken into 3 main parts. The core, which is kind of what this chart on the screen shows, implementation tiers, and profile. So we'll kind of talk about that. And then hiding down here in the bottom corner is an actual link to this. So this is all out there. Nothing top secret about this. It's right at nist.gov/cyber framework. All right, so let's look at the core. So there's 5 major categories of the core. So this is kind of the top tier. So again, another way to think of the framework is it applies to, no matter what layer of the organization you're talking to, right? So if you're at the board level, right, they can understand this, and all the way down to the guy at the bottom of the totem pole, right? They can understand that. So perhaps at the board level, they might be focused on these big words, right? Simple big words, right? Identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. So that's it in a nutshell, right? The framework helps you, right? You identify what you have today. What assets do you have? Where are your risks? Protect, right? What are we going to do to protect that? Detect. How are we going to determine if there's actually something going on, right? Respond, we got to have a plan of action in case we do detect something. What do we do? And then recover, which is basically if we have to recover from an incident, how do we recover from that, right? So it's very, very simple, right? Of course, each one of those categories can be broken down into a little bit more finer detail, right? So that's what the chart is. So you may start off at the far left with kind of the big picture, right? We just need to be able to detect, an attack. We need to be able to identify what we have today. And then as you move along, you go into the categories and subcategories, and that's when you get into the finer details of each one of those, major categories. So maybe the board level guy is focused on the far left, but maybe you, as the bottom of the totem pole guy, you're focused here under the subcategories, right? Because you're really deeper into the weeds, into the technology of what's going on. And then the last piece of this is the informative references, are basically, they point you right to existing industry standards that are out there today that would help you. And you'll see a picture of this in just a second. So just to kind of show, there's a little more meat there than that empty chart. So identify, so here's kind of your categories, right? You have asset management, business environment, governance, risk assessment, risk management strategy. And then, so major category was asset management. Well, then we can further divide asset management into some subcategories. And then as you can see, each one of those subcategories has some specific standards that they point to. And as you can also see, ISA is quite frequently pointed to in the framework. COBIT, I believe, is one around the IT world, and CCS is another one that's kind of similar to the framework, where CCS1, CSC1, CSC2, they point to different kind of subcategories within cybersecurity. And there's actually a document on that too, which we'll share these on our website after. But the CSC is the critical security controls. It's about an 90 page book that kind of talks about, so CSC1 would have certain things that it would point to, and CSC1 kind of refers to that asset management stuff as well. So that's the framework in a nutshell. So again, you don't have to do, this is total, I don't think I mentioned that there's no requirement to do any of this stuff. It's just, again, your own kind of roadmap, shall we say, to cybersecurity risk reduction. We move to protect, and here's kind of the categories that you would see under there. So access control, awareness, data security. Detect is anomalies, continuous monitoring, detection processes. Respond is, again, response planning. Just have a plan, right? Know that if you do have something, how are you going to respond to it? Communications, and then recover. So what is your plan, right? Once again, just have a plan in place to recover. Not just, hey, we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. Think about it ahead of time. So that's kind of the core. Now you move into the tiers, and the tiers are really meant to just help identify, where you are kind of in the cybersecurity risk strategy, shall we say. So they kind of break it down into 4 major tiers: partial, your risk informed, your repeatable, and your adaptive. And again, this is just kind of looking at your practices, your threat environment, and then kind of your general place where you are, and you kind of, I guess, self-assess yourself where you're at. So this is kind of looks like. So you actually have 3 major categories here: your risk management process, your integrated risk management program, and your external participation. And you can kind of look at each one of these major sections, and you can kind of give yourself your own score, right? Are you a tier 1 or you're a tier 2? You may not be a tier 4 across the board. You might be a tier 4, under the risk management process, but you might be a tier 2 everywhere else. And obviously, the further you kind of come, the higher the tier you go, the more money it would take to get you there. So risk management process, that's basically, how well are you aware of your risks? How well have you assessed your risks? And what's your process to kind of, be in that risk management? Integrated risk management program is how well are you telling your employees about your risk, right? So you could have spent millions of dollars in reducing your risk, but if you didn't tell anybody in your own organization, how to reduce those risks, you didn't really do anything, right? So you have to really be able to communicate with your internal stakeholders, be it employees or whatnot, and make sure they understand the rules of cybersecurity, right? And then external participation is how well do you collaborate outside of your organization? So that might sound kind of interesting, right? Usually you don't want to share this type of stuff, but they do look at that as, how well do you, actively share information, again, not just, hey, I know what I'm doing, leave me alone, but how willing are you to actually take an outside opinion and continue to improve your risk reduction. And the last piece of the framework is the profile, which is basically, that's kind of you, that's your plan. It's kind of your snapshot in time. This is my profile. This is, everything I've assessed, and this is everything we've done to implement those risk reduction programs, and that'd be kind of your profile. So if you've ever gone to any kind of cybersecurity seminar training, you'll know that once you set all that up, it's not just static and we just walk away and kick our feet up on the desk and say we're done with it, never look at that again. Cybersecurity will always be a continuous process, right? So you need to always, prioritize and scope out your risks, orient yourself, take your current snapshot, right? Your current profile, conduct your risk assessments, create where you want to be from that, right? Your target profile, determine and analyze and then prioritize those gaps, how you're going to solve that and get to that target, and then implement that plan. And of course, keep on doing that over and over again continuously. So that's the idea of the NIST framework. And with that, that was a quick little introduction. I want to turn it over to our guest speakers, Gabby Corin and Matthew Petrauskas, both with NG. I'll let Matt kind of introduce himself real quick, and then I'll flip the slides over while you do that.
Great, thanks so much. So my name is Matt Petrauskas. I'm a regional account director out of our Dallas office for Indigi, covering the TOLA region. So this is right in my backyard. I appreciate the opportunity to come here today. Just a quick note, so how this all came about. I was talking with Dean several weeks ago, and he talked about this upcoming event and was looking for a speaker and a topic. And it just so happens that he surfaced the NIST discussion, and Indigi's solution out of the box actually maps very well and helps our customers close the gap, just out of its basic functionality to conform to the NIST standards, a good portion of those. So we're going to focus primarily on the framework today, the core. And with that, and I know we're a little pressed for time, I'm going to introduce Gabby Corin, who's actually my manager out of our New York office. Honored to have her here today. She's our VP of Sales for the Americas, and this is actually my second time for working for Gabby. I worked with her at another company. One other note, I'm going to hand out, I've got copies of the white paper that we've developed, the NIST white paper, because a few of the slides that have the standards and how we accommodate those, a little bit of eye chart. So I'll hand those out while Gabby's getting set up here.
Okay. Thanks, Matt. Thank you, Wayne. And thank you, everybody, for joining. Very happy to get out of the cold weather a little bit, even to defrost even for a few hours. This is not meant to be a sales presentation. I will be talking about Indigi, but the main idea is our take on the NIST framework. By the way, our analysis of the framework has been downloaded and accesses thousands of times by customers and people out there which shows that there is a true need in different verticals for someone to give guidelines. And it's very curious to us that with all the talk about cybersecurity, what is happening in the world, most verticals and most industries don't have any standard whatsoever. It's kind of a Wild West. The ones that are a little bit ahead of everybody else are two. One is automotive, and the second is pharma, which is not surprising, of course, but it's very, very far from being a standard that everybody abides by. So it's kind of a recommendation or a discussion going on, and there are some that are popping up and saying, okay, we are committed to create such a standard. But what you see is a lot of hunger from the different communities for someone to give guidelines, especially when it comes to cybersecurity, because unfortunately, cybersecurity, with all its maliciousness, is moving way faster than anybody else, and it's evolving almost daily. So you might be covered, today, and tomorrow morning you wake up and, complete chaos, right? So as we say to our customers, you don't want to be the next Equifax CEO, right? So, so this is the reality of this world. Feel free to jump in, ask questions, and make it as interactive as possible. And I'll do my best to answer your questions. So I will talk about our take. I will present the Indegy, but again, this is not meant or intended to be a sales presentation. Indegy was founded about 4 years ago in Israel. Our founders, and it's an honor for me to be here in the slide, although this slide originally had the 3 founders. The 3 of them coming, and they met at the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, where they learned about cybersecurity. The 3 of them are coming very interesting and very different from other companies in our space. The 3 of them are coming from an OT background and not IT background. So more on the operation, manufacturing, production side, and not so much on the IT world, which in my opinion is one of the most fascinating parts of cybersecurity for industrial applications, which is how OT and IT suddenly meet. And it's interesting for us to be sometimes at meetings and realize that the IT folks never had access to a production floor. And they don't know how a production floor looks. Because until now, there wasn't a need for any IT person to be on the side of the manufacturing or the production or the delivery. But suddenly, this all comes together because the question and the common denominator for both is how do we keep this safe and secure? So this is the convergence between the security and other areas of the organization. We are very popular on pharma, energy, automotive, and we're seeing a very nice growth also in food and beverages, which has a lot of similarities to the pharma world because of the complexity of these environments. We are well backed by investors. We have about $30 million already raised in 2 rounds. And one of our main investors is Shlomo Kramer. If you heard his name, he was one of the founders of Checkpoint, Palo Alto Networks, one of the first investors in Palo Alto Networks and Cato Networks, as well as in Perva, and really a name when it comes to security in the security industry, and also General Petraeus, as well as Magma, one of the first investors in Waze. So very, very well backed organization. So we are all in Indegy, we're very careful, and as a strategy and methodology, one of the things that I liked about the company the most is that we refuse to sell on fear. This is not our strategy. And cybersecurity is scary. And it's scary because there is much more unknown than known when it comes to cybersecurity. But when the company was founded and the solutions were developed, the founders kind of took a step back and say, what other similarities do we see? What do we see that happens in today's world on the OT side of the house, on the production manufacturing? And what they found out is that there are a lot of disruptions that can happen. And cybersecurity, although one of the most feared ones and the most concerning ones, and on the positive from a negative side, the one that is driving a lot of budgets and investments as well, but this is the most uncommon one. What is more common are the other two. And companies, when we ask them, what do you see more when you have the three, the cyber threats, the malicious insiders, or simply the human error, they will say that human error is the first one. It happens all the time. Not only internally, but also from third party that comes in and touches stuff and messes up stuff without any malicious intent whatsoever. This is much more common than a cyber threat driven by a nation. Although the third one is getting a lot of press and a lot of attention. Now, when that happens, when the cyber threat happens, it's huge. It affects everybody, and it affects the organization because the intent is to cause massive disruption. The other two are way more common. One of our auto customers, one of the top 5 in the world, they just said, we had a third-party maintenance provider came in, made a change to one of the controllers, and they caused 2 robots to collide. Now they have to decommission a lot of cars because of that. It took them 3 weeks to find out who has made the change. Of course, they asked, "Who made it? Did you make the change?" Nobody made a change, of course. Now nobody touched anything. And one of the things that happen on the ICS or the OT network, which is inconceivable when you think about it, is that there is no audit trail, there is no history, there is nothing. So the only thing that you can rely on is asking and saying, who made a change? And guess what? Nobody raises their hand. So when we look at the 3, the first one is very interesting and very cool to talk about, and is driving a lot of attention, but the other 2 are happening much more. And when you put the 3 together, and we talk to OT executives, they are saying where you've been all of our lives, because we've been crying about that for the last 30, 40 years. It's just nobody really put this in the priority. And one of the things that we like about the NIST framework is that it's putting this in the right priority and attention. Some of the published cyber attacks, starting with Stuxnet in 2010, but you see the times, so Stuxnet was 2010, and then the next one, which was the German steel plant, and then the one in Ukraine. So you see that there was a jump from 2010 that was that famous one, and the next one that happened in 2014. When we fast forward to 2017, almost daily, we saw stuff happening, right? So the latest one, the Triton and the Spectrum meltdown that is affecting chips. And we saw the dam, and I don't know if you guys remember just a few weeks back what happened in the Atlanta airport, that it was a massive shutdown. Now, nothing to do, apparently, nothing to do with a cyber attack, but what happened when the most busy airport in the world, definitely in the US, has 15 hours without power. And the scramble to find what happened. Did someone change anything? Is there a problem in the infrastructure? What happened there, and how fast can you recover from a thing like that? So again, not necessarily cybersecurity related, but you see what the disruption can do to an organization. And as time goes by, we see this shrinking and shrinking in terms of the timeline that happens, and it happens almost daily. The reality, and I'm not going to stop at each one of them, but this is not anymore someone else's problem. And they believe that, oh, who's going to attack me, right? We meet sometimes customers that are saying, oh, my network is completely air-gapped. Yeah, right. Maybe it was air-gapped 25 years ago. Good luck to you. Today is not anymore. And actually the need for consistency, I think Wayne, you spoke about having a consistent process or a consistent approach, is trumping the need of being air-gapped and isolated. Because actually you are looking, when you are a multinational, when you have multiple plants, you want everybody to use the same processes and the same procedures and the same structure. This is impossible if you are completely isolated. So it's always that balance between the two. And guess what? And guess who wins there when you put it on the weight? So the alternative is to have the right processes and the right procedures and the right security in place. The third is very interesting, and this happens to us every day when we meet customers, and we meet a lot of customers. The first question that we ask is, can you tell me what is that you have on your network? Do you know how many devices you have? Do you know your infrastructure? And guess what is the answer? I have no idea. And it's not a bad answer. It's absolutely the truth, because they don't know what is out there. Now, this is driven by the fact that the devices are changing all the time, and this is very dynamic and it's large, but also is driven by M&A and consolidations, and it all comes together. But the most important one that an IT person not necessarily understands is that nothing ever stops production. The OT network never stops. So the only option is to keep it moving. So you don't replace devices, you don't touch them, you don't stop, because nothing stops production. So over 10, 20, 30, 40 years that you can never stop the production, you just keep adding and patching more and more. So you come in 20, 30, 40 years later, and someone asks you, do you know how many devices you have? Oh God, no. No. I'm afraid to ask how many devices I have. So that's the first step. So ICS is everywhere, and thank you, Wayne, for showing the different categories. And we see this, and actually we see this also changing and evolving. One of the most interesting for us, and it kind of dawned into Indegy as well, was the building management. And we were contacted by one of the largest banks in the US about BMS, and we said, what about you and infrastructure and cybersecurity? What's going on? And they explained to us about their data center. So they have 5 data centers. And can you imagine a bank without a data center working? Can you imagine a bank, forget about the data center, can you imagine a bank that suddenly doesn't have AC working in the data center? Unless they bring all the employees that start doing foo on the computers, the bank cannot operate. Can you imagine a hospital that doesn't have elevators working? It doesn't require much, because there is no history, there is no ID passwords, there is no security, there is no audit trail. Anyone can do that. Anyone can tamper with that. And it will take them a lot of time to figure out what happened and who did what. So we actually see this growing more and more and more, and being exposed to more verticals, that someone wakes up in the morning and says, oh my God, I have critical infrastructure. It's not a chemical company, but it might be a hospital, it might be a data center, it might be a school. So ICS is truly everywhere. The framework has defined, also to make it easier on these verticals to be able to sleep better at night a little bit, what is low impact, medium impact, and high impact. So for the purpose of this presentation, we really don't care what level do you consider your organization to be, because this can happen to anyone. And again, forget about cybersecurity for a moment. Any disruption whatsoever can happen to any of them. But there is a clear definition of where, and also make it easier for these organizations to decide whether they want to implement the framework or just take it easy and much more over time. So you see the moderate impact and the high impact. So of course, the high impacts are the ones that are running faster to implement the framework or some of the components of the framework in order to be protected and protecting their infrastructure. Now, I don't know if you notice, what is the word that comes up the most in this slide? I want to see that everybody's awake. Yes. Continue. That's a bad slide, right? Yes, you would agree with me. And the continuous has two purposes. One is to feed vendors like us, so not to be a one-time buy, right? A one-time sell. No, but putting jokes aside, all these disruptions, and again, jumping on the cybersecurity, which is the one that is driving the more budgets and the more attention, is really evolving in such a pace that there is no other chance than being and looking at this as a continuous process and not a one-off. So when it comes to understanding what is that you have in your infrastructure, in your network, how many devices and what is their versions and what is out there, you do it one time and then you focus on the deltas, right? But you have that infrastructure kind of much more clear to yourself. But when it comes to monitoring and assessing risk, this is truly a continuous process, and not only because the threats are evolving over time, but also your priorities are changing over time. So if I'm concerned about third-party organizations providing service to us, I also want to know and want to tell my organization that next week I have a maintenance coming up in all my Allen Bradley controllers. So I don't want to be awaking every 5 minutes because there's alarms going on that someone is changing and making changes to the controllers. I want to be able to say, no, I know that maintenance is coming, so I want to control the process and assess the risk accordingly, because these are living and breathing environments that the number one objective is that nothing stops them. This one is cute because it was written in Hebrew, right? So the core is actually first and it goes that way, right? It's in Hebrew. Yes. I will focus on the core, and the reason that we focus on the core is that is the one that really defines what is required in the organization in order to be compliant, and also what requires from the organization in order to be able to understand the risk associated with any threat that happens in the organization. But if you guys want later on, we can also touch on the other two as well. So Wayne did a great job going one by one. What I want to do now is to present Indigy's take on each one of the components. I will really touch on it just for a few seconds, and then we can, we're here, so we can spend more time in any of those. Just to prove that we're not making this up, we actually took the real framework. Please do not test me and ask me specific about each one, but we actually have people that read the framework line by line and really looked at each one of the references in order to see how we can comply and how we can help organizations be compliant or adopt the framework. So you will see it in the white paper that you have that Matt distributed to you. But the way that is structured is that we took each category and each subcategory, and then we explain how we do it or how we can help you if you want to implement and apply the framework to your own environment, how we can help in each one of the categories. What I want to show you is actually the cool stuff, and not just to bore you with 500-word slides. So the first one is the identify, right? That was the first line, and it's also what happens in real life, not only when it comes to the NIST framework, but really every single vertical that we meet. And we ask that question: can you identify all the assets that you have? Now, not just identify the assets, but also map them. Because what we found out is that there are many devices out there and many systems out there that are part of the network. And some of them happen to be isolated and not connected to anything. And some of them are connected to just one device. And what we found out, these are the most dangerous situations in that network. Those that are kind of isolated, but they pop up sometimes, and they pop up and then they're quiet again for a while. And if we go back to Stuxnet in 2010, the threat or the virus or the change was actually introduced about 6 months before it caused the damage. And what we see in many of these situations, even the latest one, which was the meltdown, was that it's not new. It was there for a long time, sometimes dormant. So we look at all these different devices that may introduce risk to the organization, although they don't introduce risk or threat today, but they might be introducing risk in the future. So not only we look at the different devices, we also map them and put them in a network map so you can clearly see who is talking to who and how often also. So we look at the ones based on the thickness of the lines. We see which one are the most popular devices that everybody's talking to them, and the ones that are a little bit isolated that might pop up suddenly. We use two different technologies. I'm not going to dive into the technology itself, but it's not enough to know that there is a device out there if you cannot go deeper on the device and say what is the version and what is the firmware and what is the patching level and so on and so forth, so you can actually take action and make a decision around these devices. So we go really, really deep on our analysis of the identification process of what is that you have out there, and based on that, you can decide how to protect yourself. Same idea on the protection. So this is the monitoring part. Now, what makes us unique is that we just connect, and we don't need to create that baseline in which we teach the system what to do or tell the equipment in advance what to look for. The moment that we connect, we start monitoring. And we monitor all the activity that happens in the network, looking for the patterns that show us that something is going on or something might require attention. And this is how we protect and continuously protect the environment. Now, again, remember, when it comes to the OT network, nothing stops the network. Nothing stops the production. So we monitor and we listen to what is happening all the time. And we report back. You're going to see in a moment that we report back so someone can take an action or can make a decision. What happens to us is when we meet IT executives, one of the questions that we hear is, oh, so can you stop the controller? Can you stop the PLC? Like, can you send a command to the PLC to stop? And then you see the OT guy that requires Valium because he faints right there in the middle of the meeting. What do you mean stopping a controller? Like, what do you want to do with that? Okay, so detection. So not only monitoring, but actually understanding what is the risk associated. So this is the part in which we detect, using our own tools, what are the areas that you have risk in your industrial network, in the industrial control network. So I'm going to show you how. One of the cool things, and again, if you guys want later on, we can deep dive. But what we also show is what are the most common activities that are happening in your environment. So for example, if you wake up in the morning, you come to work, and someone did a PLC stop, which is a big deal, or download code into your PLC, it might happen to only one. Indegy will tell you if this is happening more than 1, 2, 3, 5 times, because we continue to accumulate this information and then show you the top 5 activities that are happening in your environment. So not only we look at activity happening per device, per each device, and then say, hey, there is a risk associated here, but we also accumulate this information and say, okay, what are the trends in my organization? What is happening in my organization that I need to be aware of? And then based on that, and going back to the framework, you want to define the processes. What does it mean that anybody can download code to my controllers? Like, who defined that this is okay? And there are organizations that this is okay. There are organizations that anybody can stop a PLC, start, stop PLC, and off you go. And there are organizations that this is a big no-no. Nobody can do that because you want a process in place that says what is allowed and what is not allowed. So Indegy not only tells you what is happening today, but actually creates that infrastructure in order to say, okay, how I want my organization to operate going forward. What are the areas that I might be missing? What are the blind spots in my environment that I want to take action on? The response. What do you do with this information? So Indegy is the only one that has a very unique approach to the response part. Most of the companies out there in our space are focused on anomaly detection to say, hey, there is anomalies happening in your environment. There is something weird that is happening in your environment. And how do I know that it's weird? Because it didn't happen before, basically. This leads to a lot of false positives, because the fact that it didn't happen before is not necessarily an indication that it should worry me today. On the flip side, the fact that it happened 15 times in the last week, it doesn't mean that I need to ignore the 16th time. Indegy looks at it completely different. And Indegy is driven by policies. So we are the only one out there that combines the anomaly part and the enforcing of the policies. So our approach is to tell the customer, okay, here's the situation. You need to tell me what is allowed and what is not allowed. What do you want to see and what you don't want to see? And based on that, every activity and every device and every attribute will be compared with the policies. And this is also very dynamic because your policies change over time, and policies change because you have activities going on and because you have an acquisition and because you have a change in your procedures. It doesn't matter, but it all goes to the policies. So we have 0 false positives because we go always to the enforcement of the policy. And this is the way to respond to any change that happens and every activity that happens in the environment. And last but not least is the recovery part. And we always say that you cannot stop all the cybersecurity, and you cannot stop all the human error, you cannot stop any insider threats, or all of them. That's a reality, you cannot. The million-dollar question is how quickly you can go back to full production. And it's a very interesting change, even from my 16 months perspective, that the recovery part is becoming more important even sometimes than the monitoring part. Because many of the companies have focused until now on the monitoring. Tell me what is happening, tell me what is going on, tell me what activities are happening in my environment, and in a way neglected the recovery. The goal was to stop 100% of what is happening. Organizations today are much more mature to understand that you cannot stop it all. The question is how fast you can recover. Now, this goes back to one of the challenges of lacking the history and the audit trail and everything, because if you don't have that information, how can you recover? Like recover to what? I don't know the configuration. I don't know nothing. One of our largest customers is one of the top pharma companies in the US, and they're using Indegy as the recovery tool for the configuration for the different controllers after they were attacked by WannaCry. So what you can see here is our snapshot, which is unique and only Indegy offers that, which is a snapshot of that configuration that the developers can easily translate that into a development of the configuration so you can recover the controller or the PLC or the RTU. So again, later on, if you want to come closer and see, this in particular, and this is, I think, one of the coolest features that we have, is that let's say that you come in the morning and someone downloaded code to one of your controllers. That's a big no-no in most organizations. Indegy will recommend you that you have a policy that says, if you discover a code download, do me a snapshot to every single device that I have out there. Because I want to know that the firmware has not changed, that the configuration has not changed, and that the logic has not changed. And Indegy is the only one, because of the technology that we use, that can provide you that. Now, why is this important? If we go back to most of the cyber attacks, for the operator, it looked like nothing happened. It all looked normal. And why? Because there is no connection between the logic on the device to the change. So if I have a turbine or I have a pump and I change the tag to a level that is dangerous to that device, and I do it in such a way that is cyber-driven or even human error, for the operator, if I did the change directly to the controller, to the operator, it will look completely normal. And that's the danger, because the person that is sitting there watching what is happening in the organization will say everything works and operates as normal. Indegy has all this intelligence already built up in our solution. So if there is a change in the logic, or a change in the configuration, or a change in the firmware, we are going to give an alert to say, hey, according to the manufacturer, this is not correct. This doesn't look normal, and you might want to watch it. You also might want to send an alert to everybody out there, to every device out there, that basically say, please identify yourself and tell me that no change was done to your own configuration and to your own logic and firmware. So we trigger that to all the devices, and therefore we know, and we save a lot of time for the users, that they don't need to go and check everything. Okay, so this is why it's a policy triggered snapshot, what you see here. So just to summarize and then connect the two again, this is Indegy for every and all the segments and verticals. We start by understanding the environment, and then we start monitoring, and we assess the risk, and then we enforce the policies, which is completely aligned with the framework of NIST. So you see, we implement that throughout and across all verticals. And I want to thank you again for participating and for joining us today. And then if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. Yes, sir.
So we can, on the web can hear you there.
As a class of security platforms or products, has Indegy or any of its competitors that you know of itself been attacked?
Great question. Definitely all my competitors have been attacked. that wasn't a question that I asked to be asked. No. Great question. So I would say that all of us are very responsible in this space. And one of the bases of our solutions, I will talk for Indegy, but I know our competitors very well. We don't take any action to the environment. We cannot send any command to the environment. We only can receive information. So we are passively there, existent in the environment. We don't connect to the outside world. So this is not a SaaS solution that is connected to the outside world. And we put a lot of focus on security and the software, the way that it was developed. I can tell you that so far, there hasn't been any compromise on the Indegy equipment. I cannot say, seriously speaking, I cannot say, I cannot talk about the competitors because I don't know. But this is for us the key. You can imagine, I don't know if you guys follow what happened with FireEye, but taking a cybersecurity company and proving that it was hacked or it was compromised is the end of that company. So we take this very, very seriously. But great question, thank you. Yes, sir.
Yeah, Wayne mentioned earlier about where you are on the totem pole. So at the high type totem pole, all of what you're saying makes perfect sense and it sounds good. For the guy on the lower part of the totem pole, he's in a cube somewhere, he's got to do it. How do you do this with a wide spectrum of controllers and computers? Well, let me just tell me if your firmware has been updated. The guy in the cube is going to see that as an impossible task. Obviously, you've solved it, and you don't have to explain all the details, but just generally, how do you implement a product like this or a system like this, infrastructure, I guess, with such a diverse collection of stuff?
Yeah, that's a great question, and thank you so much for asking it, because in a way, it's the opportunity and the challenge. Our biggest competitor is not to do anything. And the reason is that they're looking at the guy in the cubicle and they're saying, oh, you're handling it right for the last 25 years. You know, why would you like complexity added by adding another system? The poor guy is running across, exactly as you said, and we go to environments and we say, so what controllers do you have? And he said, what controllers I don't have, ask me, right? Because he has Siemens and he has Rockwell and he has Honeywell and he has everything under the sun. One of the reasons to implement a solution such as ours is that we are agnostic. So if you have Rockwell and you have Asset Center, yeah, you might be covered for the discovery of your Rockwell devices. You know, good for you, but that can cover, for some organizations, 10%. And if you have Emerson and you're covered on the Emerson side, which is a complete different system, right, than the one on the Rockwell. So now you're managing 2 or 3 or 4, but none of them have a cyber component to tell you, hi, you're vulnerable there and you have a threat over there. Our goal for the guy that is sitting there, and this was developed exactly for the OT side of the house more than anything, is to be intuitive, to be easy to implement. We only need a mirror port. You know, we only need a span port in order to start working. And then the system starts showing the information in a very intuitive way, so that person can easily understand and react to it. Now, why I'm saying this is the opportunity, but also the challenge, it's very difficult to sell to that guy, right, that needs it so badly. So it's always the balance on how do we show value to the top layer of the totem pole, but also we bring value to the guy that is there that is not going to drown in information. The second, which is one of the solutions, and this is, we're kind of seeing this changing over time, is connectivity to a SOC or a central operations. So someone can have visibility to everything that is going on in the organization. So we don't transfer data, of course, because you want to avoid connectivity to the outside world, but at least the alerts can be seen from one central location. And what we're seeing a trend of more and more customers that are asking for that. So in the past, it used to be, no, just, it's at the facility level or it's at the group level. Let's keep it isolated as much as we can. Organizations are changing and saying, no, we need to take this much more responsibly, and having the hints of what happened there can happen there as well, or might be relevant to the other side. But you're spot on with the question. If I can understand it.
Yeah, but can you forward one slide? There's a couple slides at the end that show some of the supported environments.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's where you're.
Yeah, I was.
There's a lot of permutations here, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it supports most
It's
manufacturers, right? So.
Yeah, but the question that you ask is absolutely correct. What you can see here, that's the reality. We go to customers and they have a combination of all of them. There isn't one. I can think, when you think automotive, it's predominantly Siemens, right? So we see Siemens there. They have the majority of the heavy manufacturing environment, but it's never only Siemens. The ability to monitor, the key there for us, and we achieve that, as well as many of our competitors, is to clearly show that you have a vulnerability. Don't tell me there is a problem. Don't tell me, Houston, we have a problem. Show me exactly where the problem is. What Indegy took a few steps forward is show me what caused the problem and tell me how to fix it. And this is what is the difference, because the first one is not enough. It's not enough, and some competitors stop there. There is a problem with controller number 14. Well, thank you very much. What do? Do I stop it? You don't want that responsibility. So we tell you that the firmware was changed, and who made the change, and when did it happen, and if it happened in any other place in the network. And this is how we make it easier for the guy, the cubicle, to be able to report properly to management, and that's a key.
There needs to be an interface between your system and whatever it is you're talking to. You've got some kind of prescribed protocol or something of how you would go about talking to a XYZ gadget that you don't have a driver for, so to speak.
Great questions.
And you all implement that, or the customer implements it?
Great question. So we have a very powerful API layer in order to interact or integrate with existing solutions. It can be, by the way, change management solution or ticket reporting as well, or Splunk if you have a SIEM or any other. Our goal is to be as hands-off as possible so the customer can be independent. We have a support group that is there for as long as the customer is active, and we're there to support if it's on the development and putting it together. But our goal is for the customer to be as independent as possible, because it's impossible that if they discover an alert, they need to call Indegy and say, tell me what it means. It doesn't make any sense. Yes, sir.
Does this system require any change at the controller level to be implemented?
Zero change at the controller level. Zero.
This system just provides the assets kind of analysis. Doesn't really prevent any. I think it was your first slide showing the error, operator error, what happened in Hawaii. How will your system prevent that kind of catastrophic event, accident, whatever?
It's a great question. I never said throughout the presentation, and we're standing behind, we don't prevent the problem. Preventing the problem will be to stop the hackers. That would be preventing the problem. What I know is when it touches your environment. That I can tell you. I cannot prevent it from happening. Nobody can,
So you
by the
will
way.
say which operator did it, but not really prevent the situation.
We cannot
And
prevent the
if the virus
situation.
comes in, you can say that it came from Turkey or Germany or Soviet Union, well, Russia,
Yeah,
but still it goes in and makes the damage.
yes.
Okay, so you do the inventory and asset management, risk management, but you're not really helping or preventing the intrusion or the accident or
So, okay, so.
I mean, unless you approach this from the policy point of view, that you develop the new whatever tools to asset and then you can, I don't know, inhibit some of the less
Sure.
responsible operators.
So one of the examples of the vulnerabilities, with one example of a customer that shared with us, that we actually discovered an IP that had characteristics from Russia in that particular case. And we say there is an IP that shouldn't be active in your environment, and we can say it's going on. And they had the right policies in place in order to stop it immediately and to take care of it immediately. I don't know what they did. I don't know if they stopped something. We know that pharma company actually took down an entire plant, and we know it because of an attack. They took it to the extreme. There wasn't any emails going in and out, which is crazy. But they took a very extreme measure there. Many others don't take such extreme measures because they're not required. But there is no way, and I'm standing here, there is no way that any of my competitors will come in and will say, we can prevent the next attack. I'll pay money for that myself. It's impossible. Because that prevention, yes, we can tell you if someone from the outside world is connected to your environment. I can tell you when, I can tell you what they did. But to prevent it, it will be a promise that cannot be kept. So we tell you what is your environment. We tell you what activities are happening. We tell you which devices are involved. We do an assessment for you to tell you, hey, you have vulnerability here because we discovered these activities happening, which can be a variety. And we also provide you with that configuration that in case that you want to make a change to that device, you can safely do it because you can go back to either a configuration that you trust or redefine the new configuration. And all of that Indigi will tell you. No one can prevent the next attack. Yes, sir.
So how do you respond in the case of some type of encryption attack where they encrypt all of your data? You have some kind of backup protection for that, or how does that work if someone basically just locks up all of your data?
So usually attacks on data, in most cases, they happen at the IT, on the Purdue level, will be on the 4 or the 5, which is touching on the IT layer. Data, which can be emails, it can be the communication, anything that goes behind the firewall. And you're talking about ransomware, that will encrypt everything. This, at least in all the cases that happen at the IT level and not at the operation level, because usually the operation level is not connected to that. So Indigi wouldn't be involved in these cases. The only thing that we do, and some of the malwares that actually made their way into the operations network, we will discover that there is software that is being downloaded. So we will tell you that this is what we discovered. We wouldn't be able to reverse encryption or any of that. That's not our space. Yes.
Okay, so let's assume that there's a company that has your product or as a class, one of your competitors. Does it require that there be a dedicated console or desk or something that somebody always steps and is looking at things, or does it operate in the background where it detects something, a siren goes off and a red light flashes and all that?
Great question. Thank you for asking. So first of all, you have the Indigi equipment here, and we have two pieces of hardware. This is our IMS, or Indigi Management Server. It's a standard it's not a proprietary piece of hardware. We provide that also on a virtual server as well, if the customer chooses to. This is where all the brains of the system happen. And as I said, at some point, we connect through a mirror port or a span port from one of the switches. In order to reach on architectures that have multiple layers, or not all the information gets routed to one of these main switches or core switches, we also develop sensors. This is a down version of the IMS. And the sensors just collect data, encrypt it, and send it to the IMS for processing. The only thing that the customer should provide is either a laptop or a computer in which you can visualize the application. We use Chrome for access. It doesn't require to be connected all the time, and it doesn't require for the person to be watching all the time. The policies will do that for you. We can send you emails. It can connect to an alert, or they can connect to a SIM in which you will see the alarms or the alerts at their level. We have critical, medium, and low level of alerts. So if there's something major, you will get notified, and if not, the moment that you come in and you have the Indigi application open, you will see if there's any alert that you need to resolve. But most of our customers don't have personnel dedicated to it in no way, shape, or form. And they ensure that through the policies, they get notified if needed. Yep. The first one, no, go up. No, more. The first one. No, 18. So you can see here in the one in the back, you see that all of them are green, and then some of them are blue. Blue is for information purposes. That means I want to know is low level of alarm or low level of alert. I just want this to be displayed at the application level. If it will be green, if it will be yellow or red, that will be a high alert. That means that someone needs to be notified of an alert. So that goes outside of the application, and it sends the notification outside. Every policy you define what is the level of criticality and how do you report that out. So out of 26 controllers, there are 6 that have alert. This is what it means. Yes, 4 hour 4 are in critical. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
If a controller needs remote support,
Mm-hmm.
someone consulting firm like this, whatever, how do you handle that?
The controller, you mean?
No, the ability for someone to come in and configure that controller, for example.
You're talking the controllers,
Remote-
not our
remotely.
system.
What's
No, you're talking about our systems or the controllers?
No,
The controllers, yes.
Yeah.
By the way, the thing that scares most of our customers the most is that. And more than that is that many of the service providers, the system integrators, today they demand remote connectivity also, because they don't come necessarily on site for everything. So the way that we handle it at Indigi is that we can create a policy that recognizes connection from the outside. Now you can decide a policy that says, okay, this gentleman, we know that you're coming to do some planned maintenance. We will allow it. No problem, don't show me any alert. Some others want to know exactly what happened, and we continue to record. Even if there is no alert, the log file will tell our customers exactly what you did every step of the way. But we have the option to isolate that activity and say, tell me if someone from the outside world is connected, and tell me exactly what the person is doing, because I want to monitor this. So we have customers to what the gentleman asked about being all the time looking at what happens, we have some that says, okay, now there is a window of maintenance of 3-4 hours. We want someone to be sitting there and looking to see if something changes in the organization while that happens in these 4 hours.
That's a window. We're on a 24/7
Mhm.
support system where someone in Malaysia has a problem, they'll let us know and we connect to the
You
system
connect, yeah.
remotely.
Mhm.
But it's ad hoc. We don't have a window.
Right.
Can you handle that part too?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And by the way, one of the most common threats are coming through that door. Exactly that door.
Well, one thing we do is we have one of their computers. It's configured by their IT people.
Mhm.
And so it's their computer connecting to their system. It's not one of our computers.
I feel much better now.
Yeah.
Do you?
We have a lot of computers that don't
I'm
belong
kidding.
to us.
Oh, that means that it's safe, right?
Yeah.
Yes. My mother taught me never to trust Windows, the Windows computer. Yes.
Any more questions? Yes, there's a couple of things. Any more questions? Appreciate everybody who used these tickets. If you did not use a ticket, please sign in. And if you need PDHs, put that in. I just wanted to hopefully wrap this up with the NIST standard, the importance of it. I was involved in a project back in about 2006 to 2009 that involved using NIST. It was in the energy sector, and all coal-fired power plants by the EPA were regulated that they had to have their NOx and SOx knocked down a lot. No pun intended there, but you could use that. But they had to eliminate all mercury, and there was no technology that was known at that time of detecting mercury. The mercury that they were trying to detect was equivalent to filling the Astrodome with ping pong balls and trying to find 3 orange ones in the Astrodome. That's how much mercury is emitted, but they wanted to eliminate it completely. So you could actually put it in a little bitty bottle, how much mercury they wanted. So they had 12 vendors who came out and tried to come up with the technology. 2 were eliminated very quickly. 10 were left over, and ended up there was only 2 vendors who actually came up with a workable solution. EPA regulated that by 2009, all the detection for mercury had to be done at all these coal-fired power plants. And the problem was, when it came to how it was going to be applied, especially by the various different energy companies, was there was no NIST standard. So it went to court, and the federal courts threw it out. So they virtually had to start all over again. So using that NIST framework it's important. It's nothing that can be regulated, but it's a standard that obviously is used, and the federal government used that standard and said, this, of course, in my opinion, is much more, has much more applications or replications for what we're seeing in the world today, especially with new technology. But with that, we appreciate you, Gabby and Matt. We appreciate you coming. And please keep in mind the steam coffin. That's going to be an excellent program. It will be over at the Engineering Auditorium at UNO. So we anticipate there a good turnout there. Thanks.